we need to really think about the fact that we're now bringing in close to 500,000 people a year, many of whom have very high level skills that we won't accept or recognize. Why not? It's ridiculous.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm very excited to be here today with a gentleman who I had a chance to hear speak up in a conference in the Muskokas and immediately grabbed him for a scotch and a beer because he's the kind of individual I wanted to be around. And it's turned into a friendship and a partnership for the National Association of Career Colleges. I'm here today with Dr. Stephen Murgatroyd, who is an interesting gentleman who has been teaching since 1972. I will not point out, Stephen, that I was born in 1969, but we have now been traveling across Canada to different events and filming videos for our members to look at different things they could be thinking about and talking about in the future with students and looking at technology. And I'm just really excited to have you joining us here today from Edmonton to talk about education and careers and skills development. So welcome, Stephen.
Great to be here and good to see you again. Happy New Year.
Yeah, we've jumped into another one. We just together in Montreal had a good time out there talking to a whole bunch of leaders from North America. So I'm going to get right into it. We don't usually talk about the big bios of people. We like to get into getting some thoughts out of them and things they're looking at, things they're doing. So let's jump right off because you've become a trusted advisor to the National Association of Career Colleges and our members. They seek you out. They're coming to our events to hear you talk about things. So I'm going to ask you, what is it about our sector that makes you want to be such a strong advocate for us? Because you are an advocate.
I am and have been an advocate for private education for a long time, so it's not a new thing for me. This is what I see. I see the career colleges as agile, responsive, flexible, creative, connected, able to move quickly in a skills agenda that's very demanding right now. We still have 800,000 job vacancies in this country, and the best people to respond to that challenge are not the public institutions, it's the private ones. They have better connections to employers, they have better kind of links to community, and they are small and nimble and agile and can move quickly. That's what attracts me. So I'm excited to be involved with NAC. And I'm also excited to be involved in individual institutions right across the country.
One of the things you and I have talked a lot about is partnerships. And I know you're an advocate for community colleges and universities as well, that we all have a role to play. But you're a big proponent of how close we are to employers and the connection to partnering with other institutions as well. So do you have some thoughts on that you have shared with our members?
Sure. I think the DNA of the economy we're in right now is collaboration. Without collaboration, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not competing with the public institutions. We're not competing with each other. We're trying to build an ecosystem of training, learning, and development in every community in the country that can meet that community's needs for people, skills, and jobs. So I think collaboration is the DNA we all should be working on. And I think the more we can collaborate within the sector, within the private college sector, the stronger the sector will become. But we should also be collaborating with anybody that wants to work with us to make a difference to the skills agenda in Canada. It's urgent. It's something we need to do now.
Yeah, everybody's got a role to play, as you and I have talked about over a beer or a scotch. It's easy to talk about our strengths. Let's get into the weaknesses of our sector. Let's get into the weaknesses of the whole education system in Canada and the things that you see that we should be looking at and improving. And I want to talk a little bit about your own experiences too. And you've done some things. You've broken new ground. Your executive MBA being something that obviously was groundbreaking.
Yeah, we launched the world's first fully online executive MBA in 1993-94. So very, very early in the history of the internet, very pioneering, brave, some would say stupid thing to have done. But I tell you, we made a massive difference. We took over 30% of the executive MBA market in 24 months in Canada. So I've been a pioneer and an innovator all of my adult life. But you asked me about weaknesses. Let's talk about the private college weaknesses first, and then I'll talk about the system as a whole. The history of Canada is one in which the private players have always been seen as secondary to the public players. And so the brand position of the private career colleges has been weak for a long, long time. Ironically, if you look at an institution like Sprott Shore in British Columbia, it was founded before the University of British Columbia. And so we have a long, long history, but we have never broken through this kind of brand barrier. So that's one problem. We're not helped by the fact that there are a few bad actors that give the whole sector a bad name. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because I think they are so few and far between, and they're always managed well by the sector itself and by the regulators and by the support we get from other institutions. But that does have an impact on the position. But I think the biggest problem is the low level of collaboration we've seen historically in the sector within the private sector itself. So those are some kind of negatives that we're all working to deal with and working to respond to. If you look at the ecosystem as a whole, the higher education ecosystem, we're still too slow to respond to opportunity, too slow to change. For example, we're still assessing people using assessment techniques developed in the 19th century when we have technologies now that would enable us to individualize assessment and to make assessment available for anything on demand. We could completely revolutionize our learning systems, but nobody's willing to change the business model. And so I think this is the age of innovation. And I am giving up on many big institutions, universities, and colleges, and I look to the private colleges as a source for real innovation in this country. It's time we stepped up. So I think this is a fantastic time. Sure, there are issues, but if there aren't any issues, why are we all here? I mean, I can't think of a sector that doesn't have a challenge, a problem, or a set of issues. So we better get on and deal with them, but move on and see our role as innovators and the leaders of change for higher education in Canada.
I love that message. I had the pleasure of working for one of the great Canadian leaders, Darren Entwistle at TELUS. And he always challenged us to never fail to take advantage of an emergency or a disaster or a change.
Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yep, exactly. And COVID was one of those that allowed us to go online.
Yeah.
In many of the regulatory environments we're in, Ontario was a good example where we could not teach online. And all of a sudden we were teaching online 2 weeks later. The colleges were very agile, nimble, as you said earlier, at getting online and using the technology. So I'm with you, as you know, on skills assessments and collaboration and finding new ways to do things. So I like the fact that your weakness in many ways is a strength if we do it right.
It's a real opportunity. The weaknesses are always the other side of an opportunity, right?
Yeah. So I look forward to that. So let me just change a little bit here. Let's take a look at what an essential skill you believe should be included in every college program to better prepare students for the challenges as they graduate from any kind of an institution.
So I'm an employer as well as a consultant. I have staff. And when I hire, I'm not really hiring on technical skills. They wouldn't be in the room if they didn't have them. I'm actually looking for, do I want to work with this person? Are they going to be fun? Are they going to be creative? Are they going to be imaginative? Are they a good team player? Are they going to be problem solvers and problem finders? Are they creative? That's what I'm looking at. If they're not any of those things, they can go work for the Canada Revenue Agency or some dull shop that doesn't care whether you've got any social skills. So I think all of those soft skills are increasingly important. It's not just me. The World Economic Forum says the same. Every employer organization says the same. So I don't think we should graduate anybody from any institution unless they can demonstrate those soft skills. But there's another category that's equally important, and that's literacy. So 42% of the Canadian workforce have literacy at levels 1 or 2 on a 5-point scale, according to the OECD. Every job advertised since 2000 has essentially required skills at levels 4 and 5. So I think we should also be ensuring that every graduate of every program in every institution in this country has literacy at levels 4 and 5. Now, I know that's challenging. We have lots and lots of students in public and private institutions whose first language is not English or French, or second language is not English or French. But I think literacy would be the most important change in our economic future. There's a big German study of Canada that says if we could improve literacy by 1% in every single situation, that GDP would grow at 5%. So literacy is the biggest single thing we can do to stimulate economic growth. And I think that's an important thing for us all to take on board. So literacy, the soft skills of work, and life is supposed to be fun. So I would like to every graduate to have enjoyed their journey and to have fun doing it. And if we can't do that, then, it gets really dull.
Well, I've now heard you speak about 10 times, it seems like, and everybody leaves with a chuckle and a laugh and a lesson learned. And we had an event in Montreal, and I know we'd had people, that was the third time they'd heard you this year at one of our events. And they weren't in the hallway. They were engaged and listening. And I think the other part of what you're talking about is that if you're having fun, you get more engagement, you get more interest, you get more of a satisfaction out of it. And it was interesting to watch people come back into the room, senior people, wanting to be a part of what you were talking about. And I'm intrigued by your literacy comment, because we've not talked about that before. I'm not hearing anybody else talking about that as being an issue, but as you say it, it's a very, very strong point.
I have a colleague in Ontario, Scott Murray, who used to be Director General of Stats Canada, and his analysis is very, very powerful of these issues. And he's been working very closely with Canada West Foundation on looking at literacy and skills development as a key challenge for Canada. The literacy challenge can be solved by employers taking more ownership of training and development, because that's the other problem Canada has. So few employers are spending the money on professional training and development or skills development for their staff. We lag behind. We're kind of almost bottom of the OECD league in terms of employer spending on training and development. Now, that's another place where I think the private colleges could step up and do more. We don't just have to offer certification programs and credentials. We could be doing a lot more of this support for companies developing the skills of their workers on the job. So I think there's a new kind of category of potential here. But yeah, literacy is a big, big deal.
I'm not a big fan of the word micro-credential. I don't like the word. I don't think it explains that you're leaving with a skill. And it led to some confusion in this sector about what it is. I think it's led to confusion with people. It's just, there's great value in these small, short courses that you can get into. Do you have any, I know you've got thoughts on this, but I wanted to put it out. I've never said it out loud. I don't like the word.
Well, I talked to one employer, major employer, not your former employer, who said that he didn't know the difference between a microwave and a micro-credential. I agree. I think this is a whole shambles of a mess. Just in Ontario alone, there's close to 4,000 micro-credentials from the public institutions. And across the country, we have close to 15,000. I don't know what this landscape is going to turn out to be. And there are massive issues with these. So I don't want to get into all the detailed issues, but I could. I mean, that could be another podcast. But your point is that short courses that are focused on competencies and skills are in demand. A lot of the micro-credentials that we have now are not focused on competencies and skills. They're kind of just broken up pieces of courses that colleges have been offering for years. I think the opportunity to say, if you do this 15-hour course, we will assess you in terms of competencies that are job relevant to this job at this time. And it's certified not just by us as a college, but by this list of employers. And I think that's the missing trick that I think you guys could pull off in the private college sector, to say that every one of our short course programs is certified by an employer who says, if you have these skills, we'll take it.
So let me build on what you're saying there. This podcast isn't meant to be an advertisement for our sector, but you're such a strong advocate for who we are and what we do. And you come from a university world. You come from that sector, but I know you're a believer in all the layers have a role to play. I wanted to just put on the table with that, when we talk about these small skills-based, assessment-based courses, one of the great strengths that we bring to the table, back to school day is Tuesday. Back to school day is not the first Tuesday after Labor Day in the career college sector. You can start a course next Thursday and become a truck driver, or you can start a cybersecurity program a week Friday at a college and get going 6 weeks later, and then 8 weeks and 10 weeks, whatever, based on what program you take. So I did want to just mention that, because I think that's one of those great strengths that gets lost in the conversation about our sector.
Right. I used to be the dean of the business school at Athabasca University, which admits students at the beginning of every month for undergraduate courses. And students can call the assessment the exam when they are ready. So I could enroll on the 1st of August and call the exam for the 15th of August and be done with a 3-credit course. It's up to me. I drive the bus if I'm a student. And we were criticized heavily by everybody else in the sector, saying, how could you possibly do that? The answer is simple. If you're ready to be assessed, you're ready to be assessed. Why are we judging when that time would be? So the more you put students in control of their flexible learning agenda, the faster they will complete and the more relevant that program will be. And so I'm delighted that Start on a Tuesday is still alive and well. And I think more and more institutions should be making courses and programs available on demand. But the other thing that I've been doing in New Zealand is separating assessment from courses. So if I already know a lot of stuff, because I've been doing it for years as a cook in a kitchen, why do I have to do all these courses for my Red Seal catering diploma or chef's diploma when I could already just go in and be assessed and I'm done? I don't need a course. And so we have universities like the University of Wisconsin offering assessment-only credentials in nursing, in a number of health professions, in IT, supply chain logistics, all sorts of areas where you just do assessments, you don't do courses. And I think that's another opportunity that I've been trying to sell in Canada for a decade and got nowhere, but I managed to sell it in New Zealand as an idea to the Open Polytechnic of New Zealand. So they are pursuing that idea of assessment on demand, independent of courses.
You may have missed it because our editors are pretty good, but there's a bit of passion in Dr. Murgatroyd. There was a bit of table banging that went on there. I just wanted to highlight the passion is there for the sector. So on that, you're talking about New Zealand. In Canada, what policy changes do you see need to happen to create a better, I'll call it an enabling environment for career colleges? And we use the word regulated, by the way, not private. We use the word regulated career colleges because we are heavily regulated. But there are changes that could be made for more and for less regulation that would improve the sector.
It's a very interesting question. I think one of the propositions I've been pushing is the idea that part of the reason you're heavily regulated is you don't have your own quality assurance mechanisms at the provincial level. And so one of the changes I would make is to create a national framework for quality assurance and then look at local, regional, provincial implementation of that framework through a provincial quality assurance agency for the regulated colleges. And I think you could get good partnerships with some regulators to kick that off, because it would reduce their burden and increase the sense of control that you have of your own destiny. However, the part of what I would change nationally in terms of quality assurance is the whole framework for quality assurance. Now, I've been heavily involved. I've undertaken quality assurance activities for the Maritimes, for Ontario, for British Columbia, for Alberta. And I actually drafted part of the regulations for 2 of these jurisdictions. And I know what the framework is. And I know that part of the problem we have is people don't want new competitors getting into the business. And so the process is one in which it's difficult to break out of existing ways of working. I think we need to reinvent the whole quality assurance frame and to create reciprocity across the country. Right now, my old institution, Athabasca, has to undergo quality assurance processes in every jurisdiction in Canada and in the United States. It's a nonsense, and it's a very expensive nonsense. So we should cut this out and create real, genuine transparency and interprovincial recognition of quality assurance. So that's one thing. Second one is it can take a lifetime to get a new program approved in some jurisdictions. Some are very fast, some are very slow, and the process is very cumbersome. So in one of my past lives, I was very involved in a private institution in BC, and it took them 5 years to get approval for a new program. This should happen in weeks, not months, not years. So I would streamline the program approval process. And the other big territory is the more rapid recognition of foreign credentials. We need to really think about the fact that we're now bringing in close to 500,000 people a year, many of whom have very high level skills that we won't accept or recognize. Why not? It's ridiculous. And so I think we need to have this assessment on demand for those people right now. I think it's urgent. And the last thing I'd say is, look, we have some fantastic new tools from artificial intelligence. I'm not talking chat GPT, I'm talking about analytics. We could do much more with the data available to us to look at how the system is doing and to explore issues like why are completion rates so low in some institutions? Some public universities have completion rates lower than their dropout rates. And I found that offensive and problematic. But we need to better understand the dynamics of our education system by using advanced analytics and using dashboards a lot more. So I can see a whole raft of policy opportunities here. And we need to create policy frameworks that enable and encourage innovation rather than put a kibosh on it. So we need to do more to enable possibility and less to enable control.
I can't agree with you more. I have to tell the story of being at Discovery College in just outside of Vancouver and going to their dental office manager program. These are people who are being trained to run dental offices, never to touch a patient, never be interacting with a patient in the chair, and doing a bit of a tour of the college, chatting with them. And I think there was 12 students in the class, if I correctly remember. And our board member, Krista, was taking us on a tour. And they asked a question. She says, "Now, how many of you are foreign trained dentists?" And 7 hands went up. New immigrants to Canada, who had immigrated to Canada and then had enrolled in their courses. To me, it was a very sad moment with the shortage of dentistry in the country. But they were all just happy to be getting back to work in that practice in some way. So I think the foreign credential one is what is important. And the program approvals you speak of, obviously, we're all looking at that. Sadly, I didn't flinch when you mentioned a 5-year approval progress. I've heard those stories from some of our members. And like many organizations, the regulators are short-staffed now too. And we had a great meeting with some regulators recently, and the conversation came up, and one of them said, very funny Atlantic Canadian, said, "We're not the sexiest job in government, and government work's not the sexiest work. So we do lose people, and it's hard to get people to come in and want to be in our departments. So they do have the same struggles that everybody else does."
We should offer a training program on how to be a good regulator.
We offered a training program, and we offered to do the regulation of ourselves, but that was, we were in a funny mood at that point. We weren't expecting it, nor to be fair, were we actually wanting that. So you opened the door. Let's talk technology.
All right.
You have had some great conversations with our members about AI and the role that can play in the career education space going forward. Give us the short version of it, because I was still blown away by some of the things you're talking about. And the brain goes to Chat GPT or creating a logo, but there's so much more that can be done that's very helpful.
Right. So I'm doing a lot of work on how to leverage AI. My graduate teaching at the University of Alberta and at Athabasca University is all really around this. And so there are three big uses of AI that I think we should be looking at. And everybody's preoccupied with ChatGPT and how ChatGPT encourages cheating. And I don't care. I just think this is a nonsense. What we should really be looking at is how we can use technologies, AI-enabled technologies. And remember, there are 11,000 AI-enabled apps available right now. And there's 30 new ones every single day being launched, some of which are based on ChatGPT, but others are based on all sorts of other stuff. So here are the three big uses. One is we can do more individualized instruction. So right now, we generally always teach as a batch of people in a room. Whether they're on Zoom or whether in a room, we teach as a batch. We don't have to do that. We could actually do that plus individualized instruction for everybody in that room. And we could also reimagine assessment using what's known as adaptive assessment. So as you do a piece of work and you're assessed on it, the system says, oh, Michael doesn't understand this, so I better do more to teach Michael that piece, and then we'll reassess Michael on that piece. Meanwhile, Susan is way past Michael on that piece, but has got other problems, and we can assess everybody individually, not as a group. So that's individual teaching, individualized assessment. And I've already mentioned analytics. I think we could all be leveraging the data we have about what students do, what they like, what they don't like, to improve course design, to expand our inclusion and equity kind of activities, and really practice what we call design justice to ensure that everybody in that institution is getting a fair opportunity to learn at their own pace and in their own way. There are a couple of other things I'd like to mention. One is when we talked about the soft skills earlier in the podcast, I think those are critical. Now, lots of employers are using video-based interviews to select people for jobs. I think every institution should put every student through a rehearsal process for those, because the engine at the back of that isn't some guy watching all these videos. It's an AI machine looking at the video and saying, oh, we should look at this person, but forget these 24 other people. So Google has developed an interview warm-up piece of software that's AI-enabled that I think we should be using. And the other one is, I think peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer assessment is part of what we are all going to be doing 2 or 3 years from now. And there's a wonderful Canadian product out of Toronto. It's a spin-off from Top Hat called Critic, KRITIK.io. And I think this is one of the best pieces of software I've seen in a long time. And it enables us to manage peer-to-peer collaboration, peer-to-peer assessment in productive and efficient and effective ways. Some wonderful case studies on their website of how instructors and professors are using that resource. So there's a website called There's an AI for that. I think everybody should be looking at that frequently to see what new opportunities AI is going to enable that would be helpful to you. And some of the videos we've shot deal with some of these kind of ideas as well.
Yeah, we're looking forward to launching that video series fairly soon. As we build on this last part, we talked earlier about collaboration and competitors and how institutions are worried about the competition. Competition's changed now, though. It isn't necessarily a regulated career college or a community college or a university. It might be LinkedIn.
Or Coursera, or FutureLearn, or edX, or the big MOOC providers. I mean, I just read a study that's not being published yet that says, coming back to this micro-credential space, in Ontario, the public colleges and universities account for less than 30% of micro-credential registrations in Ontario. 70% are Coursera, edX, FutureLearn, Amazon, Microsoft, Google.
What do you think their connection is to the local employer base to making sure you're building the skills that are actually needed? Next to none, if not none.
So the Microsoft Amazon credentials are in high demand because they do relate to skills in demand in the IT sector. However, Google just laid off 30,000 workers this week. So There's a change in that market too. So the world is changing very fast around us.
Let's do a complete change here to kind of wrap it up. As I said, we're talking about skills in these. Yours, we got a little more deeper on our sector because you've got so many unique thoughts that I hope people in government and media and universities and colleges are listening to as well, because we can all work together and collaborate together. But your own life, who's that teacher? Who's that mentor, that individual that sets you on a path? Maybe also, because there's probably one back in the history, but there might be one recently you're working with that has really got you fired up about something.
So I've been very fortunate. When I was at school back in just after the Battle of Hastings,
I knew that was coming.
I know, I was taught by this guy who recognized that I could write. And he encouraged me and really pushed me to do more and more and more. So I began my published kind of writing career when I was 14. So he's one, Mr. Delaney. At university, I had another Professor Michael Apter, and Michael and I worked together. I published my first research paper as a second-year undergraduate, which upset the faculty no end, because they hadn't published much at all, and I was out publishing some of the more senior people. But the big mentor in my life has been a man called Donald Simpson, based in Toronto, who's now just coming up to 90. And he and I have been working together since 1988. And he's a friend, a colleague, an inspiration, a collaborator, a real innovator in all sorts of ways. And he and I talk once a month at least, whether we need to or not. And he and I have created all sorts of assets and resources that we still use around the world to help organizations look at change and transformation. I ran a large consulting company, and Don was a significant mentor in that work as well. We were working with some of the largest corporations in the world. Around about 60 of the Fortune 100 were clients of ours. And so I needed help to think about how to challenge a company like Heinz or a bank like Citibank or a corporation like British Telecom to think differently about their future. So Don was a really significant colleague and mentor and friend, and remains so to this day. His sons were all in the NHL, as was one of his daughters who ran the NHL Hockey Hall of Fame.
Wonderful story.
Interesting man. Yeah.
One of the things I did want to ask that question of you, because I won't put the mentor category on you yet, but you've been a good friend and a good advisor to me that came out of, and I wanted to say it because there's young learners and young professionals who might be listening. Ask somebody for help. I grabbed you and grabbed us a beer and a scotch and asked you for help to figure this sector out. And we've been finding little ways to boil the ocean.
That's a piece of advice I give to my students. So my students, for example, in one of my courses, have to interview a significant leader. And one of them said, oh, it'd be lovely to interview Jeff Bezos. And I said, bring him up. They did, and they did the interview. They couldn't believe it. But if you don't ask, you'll never know.
Yep.
We did the same with Michael Dell of Dell Computers. Many years ago, again, same thing. One of the students said, I'd love to talk to Michael Dell. I said, well, here's his phone number. Give him a call. And, if you don't ask, you'll never find out. I have always responded to that call in a positive way because that's how I got my start. So that's what we should all do. Give back as much as you can.
Well, it was interesting because you, that day in the Muskokas, yourself and Julia Christensen Hughes is going to be joining us soon, Toronto Film School and Yorkville, who was doing very similar messages to you that day, but that same kind of offer to people. Let's work together. Let's collaborate together. So I always encourage people, don't hesitate. Ask someone for help because you might be surprised they might give it to you. I'll hit you with one last quick question for people who are going out there. And one of the great things about our institutions is our learners are older sometimes. We have a higher proportion of females in our colleges than community colleges or universities would have. So that one skill, what's that one skill that you think you should leave a program with and you should demand that you get so that you're better employable?
I think it's the problem-solving teamwork skill. So how do I work effectively in a team given this topic that we're working on, to solve the problems we're going to encounter in the workplace. Because there's no work I've ever done that isn't problem-free. It's always a challenge. And if you've got a good team of people that can work together, you could always use a problem as an opportunity to build the next thing, the next opportunity. So I would give some emphasis to that.
I agree with you 100%. I spoke on a panel recently and someone asked a question of me and I said, find a problem, come with a solution, be prepared to look at different options and then go execute. And it's not risk taking. It's doing your job. It's saying, we got a problem. Let's go fix it. So I agree with you. So Dr. Murgatroyd, I want to thank you personally for not only your support of me in this sector and trying to get it figured out, but also of our sector generally in our colleges and students over the years, and for making the time to join us today. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And with that, we'll wrap up the EdUp Canada podcast. I look forward to putting another one out next week. We're really enthused by the support we've been getting and the guests that are agreeing to show up. So we look forward to putting another one out next Wednesday. Thanks a lot. Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4- or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.